This episode is brought to you by Buzzshot, Cogs by Clockwork Dog, PG's Playhouse, and Patreon supporters like you.
Hey, escape room owners. Are you still trying to solve the marketing puzzle? Buzzshot to the rescue. Buzzshot is the secret weapon powering business growth and improving the customer experience. This is software with a ton of pre- and post-game features, including waiver management, creating incredible branded team photos, and streamlined review management for Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google reviews, Facebook reviews, wherever people review. And they also offer integrations with Cogs.
We here at Room Escape Artists know just how expensive mailing list software can get. Did you know that Buzzshot has email broadcasts and customer surveys built in? Buzzshot allows you to create professional, personalized, and timely marketing, emails, and feedback surveys using easy-to-edit templates and variable content. Buzzshot helps you collect player and marketing data and enhances your customer communication to deliver more meaningful contact with those customers. Why pay for a separate mailing list software when Buzzshot does it all?
Bob Melkis of Fox in a Box had this to say about Buzzshot. It didn't take us long to fall in love with the tools. We are now encouraging all of our franchisees to switch to Buzzshot.
Streamline your marketing and grow your escape room business. REPOD listeners get an extended free trial and 20% off your first 3 months with no setup fees or hidden charges. Visit buzzshot.com/repod, that's REPOD, to learn more. Link and details in the show notes. Welcome to the Reality Escape Pod, your lifeline when you need a getaway from the real world. I'm David Spira, alongside my co-host, PG Law. Together, we're exploring immersive gaming from all angles, and we'll be joined by guests who really know their stuff. Today's guest is author and educator Barry Joseph. His new book and companion podcast, Matching Minds with Sondheim, explores the wild, expansive, and deep relationship that the legendary composer and lyricist Stephen Sondheim had with puzzles throughout his life. And the book explores Sondheim's discovery as well as exploration of escape rooms while he was in his 80s. Welcome, Barry.
I am so excited to be here. Hi, David. Hi, PG.
We are thrilled to have you. David has been talking about doing an episode on Sondheim forever, and he was so happy when he found out somebody was actually writing a book about this. And then the best part, to cap all of this off, is that when I emailed you to invite you onto REPOD, you were like, I was literally just listening to your podcast when this email rolled in.
Like 20 minutes earlier. And congratulations on your 100th episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. So some of our listeners might be a bit confused about this episode. Before we dig into why we're talking about a musical theater icon on Reality Escape Pod, let's start with a foundational question. For those who are unfamiliar with Stephen Sondheim, what is your short explanation of this legend and his place in the pantheon of American musical theater?
Well, Stephen Sondheim was a composer and a lyricist who started in 1950s with shows you might have known, like West Side Story and Gypsy, and produced shows on and off Broadway for the next half century. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the noughts, the teens, and in fact, his last show was produced after he died in 2021. He wasn't just prolific, he transformed musical theater in the 20th century. Some people think of him as the Shakespeare of our time. Other people just think of him as God.
I had no idea the gigantic catalog of work behind his name. I mean, West Side Story is so formative. Like, my mother's name is Maria.
Nice. And many of your listeners might have learned about him when they were in high school doing the high school version of Into the Woods, for example.
For me, Into the Woods and Sweeney Todd, those were really important shows for me.
When I was growing up in the 70s, my parents had musicals on LPs, and I would lie on the floor in the living room and just pop them on one after the other. And West Side Story, that was one of my favorite to listen to. The movie soundtrack, though, not the Broadway one. A little too operatic for me at the time.
I'm going to be a little bit decadent here and set the stage for this episode because I have some personal lore and context to share with you. So buckle up for this one because this is probably the most extensive amount of setup that I've ever given for an episode.
Bring on the exposition. I'm ready.
Okay. In 2014 was a big year for me. I found escape rooms. I met Lisa, who later became my business partner and then wife, working on Room Escape Artist. And at the time, I was also working on a website for a company called MTI, or Musical Theater International. They're the licensing agency that manages a very large portion of musical theater licensing. And the crown jewel in their collection is Sondheim's collection. So if you ever want to put on a version of a Sondheim show, you are licensing it through MTI. And I was doing a lot of work for them at the time. So Sondheim was very top of mind because we were modeling all of their data using his catalog when we were building out things. Now, at the time, Room Escape Artist was known principally as the New York City and New Jersey area escape room reviewers. That was what we were covering. That was what we were known for. We would occasionally travel, usually for conferences and people's weddings, but most of our content, most of our reviews, most of our experience was New York City and a bit in New Jersey. And along our travels, owners kept asking us if we knew Stephen Sondheim. And this question came up a lot because all of them had met him as they played their games. And they all had little Sondheim stories that they would share. And at the time, I really wanted to meet the dude, but I also did not have the gumption back then to reach out. There was no version of Lisa or I in the mid-20 teens that was going to reach out to Stephen Sondheim and be like, hey, we also like escape rooms. Do you want to hang out?
That imposter syndrome will get you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, he probably would have replied and said, let's talk. Which one are your favorites?
I'm confident that he would have. And so I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but not emailing him is definitely a regret. Along the way, owners kept finding out little tidbits about Sondheim's extensive relationship with puzzles. I knew that he was good at puzzles. I knew that he liked them. I had heard stories of him making treasure hunts for his friends and that he really liked jigsaw puzzles. There were lots of little bits and pieces that I had put together, and we're going to explore all of that later in this interview. But I had on a Post-it for years, and I had rewritten this Post-it many times, that I should look into Sondheim's relationship with puzzles for a post. And every time I would poke at this, I would realize there was too much for me to do this, and I didn't have time for it. November 2021, Sondheim passed away at the age of 91, and the regrets really started to pile in. And then flash forward, Lisa and I are speaking at the Wonderful World of Words at Mohonk Mountain House in upstate New York. Big, wonderful puzzle event. And while we're there, we're hanging out at a speaker gathering with none other than puzzling legend Will Shortz. And I just had this thought hit me like a bolt of lightning, which was if anybody was going to have some information about Sondheim and puzzles, it would be Will Shortz. He's in the New York City area. He's been here for a very long time, and he has been the beating heart of puzzling knowledge for decades. So I asked him, and he says, I don't really know anything about Sondheim's relationship with puzzles, but it's funny. I have a manuscript sitting in my email right now from somebody who wrote a book about this very subject. And I have to read that because I've been asked to write a foreword for the book. And I said, do you remember the name of the author? And he said, I don't, but email me and I'll send you their information. And so we did. I get an email back from Will saying that a guy named Barry Joseph wrote this book. And I said, that's funny. I've known Barry Joseph for quite a few years. He's a longtime patron of ours. He's a regular commenter on our content. And back in 2017, he invited me to be a guest judge at an educational event at the American Museum of Natural History that was escape room themed.
Escape the planet.
And so we fired off an email and got a copy of your book, and it was phenomenal. And it was everything that I wanted to know and so much more. It's a beautiful piece of writing. And that is what brings us here, is that I've just been so incredibly happy that you crossed this giant thing off of my to-do list that I thought maybe I'll get to in retirement.
David, first, thank you. And you are welcome.
I'm just so excited to go and talk to you today about all of this stuff.
And David, I love that story because what you're doing when you describe it is you're describing these different social connections and these different streams of interest. You mentioned treasure hunts. You mentioned communities coming together at the Mohonk Mountain House amongst people who care about puzzles. You talked with Will Shortz, who had a connection with Stephen Sondheim, beginning when Will Shortz was an editor at Games Magazine. You have a connection with me as an educator. I have a connection with you through you and your wife Lisa's work, popularizing access to information about escape rooms. Those connections are just a handful of the scores, the hundreds of threads that I had to pull together to bring together this book.
Let's explore your connection. I'm curious how you found yourself devoting years of effort into exploring Stephen Sondheim's relationship with puzzles and games. What's your origin story of matching minds with Sondheim?
So I have always loved Stephen Sondheim and his work, even before I knew he was involved with it. As I mentioned, as a child growing up, I loved West Side Story. As an adult in the 1990s, I began to go to his shows in New York City, where I live, shows like Passion in 1994, and revivals of shows like Merrily We Roll Along, and of course, discovering all the remarkable music from his shows that I could listen to. That made me someone who loved his work, who was moved by his work, who found it tremendously profound, who often found myself looking at the lessons he imparted to us through his lyrics, through his characters, to figure out my own passageway through the challenges I faced in my life. And at the same time, I loved games. I designed games. I co-founded the Games for Change Festival over 20 years ago to help bring communities together who cared about the social impact of games. I designed programs for young people to design games. I made games at museums. So I had two aspects of my life that I thought had no connection with each other. And then, as David mentioned, in 2021, Stephen Sondheim passed away. His birthday's in March, just 2 days before mine. So March 2022 was the first Sondheim birthday where he was not with us. If you care about Sondheim, you know his birthday was a big deal. When he got up into his 80s, into his early 90s, there was a celebration every year, multiple celebrations to recognize him. And in fact, the one that was planned when he turned 90 in 2020 happened in March, the beginning of the COVID pandemic era. It all had to be moved online. So to have that period come where suddenly we couldn't celebrate with him, he wasn't around, it hit hard. Just as a fan, it was hitting hard. And to address that, my wife got me for my birthday 3 books about Stephen Sondheim. One book is a review of all of his shows from a postmodern perspective. And I thought it's interesting not only to see it from that perspective, but to imagine taking a frame and putting it onto his work. I then read his biography. They came out in the 1990s. And reading about it, it dabbled here and there in mentioning that Sondheim cared about puzzles, he cared about games, but it never went into it in a way that satisfied me and never showed me how deep his engagement was. And then the third book, and this was the key one, was an oral history of his show from the early 80s, Sunday in the Park with George. And in it, James Lapine, who directed it and created the show with Stephen Sondheim, is interviewing folks. And he's talking with Sondheim about when he first met, how down in the dumps Sondheim was. He had just had a tremendous flop on Broadway. It had run for less than 2 weeks. It came back and was successful a few years ago, Merrily We Roll Along. But back then, Sondheim was distraught. And as Lapine is speaking with him, Sondheim is talking about how back then he thought, I'm done with this world of musicals. I'm done with Broadway. This place is vicious. I want to go do what I really want to do. And Lapine is like, well, what's that? And Sondheim says, design video games. This is not now. This is the 1980s. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, did Stephen Sondheim say he's going to go design the next Donkey Kong Jr.?
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Actually, I do feel like video games are a spiritual successor in some ways to theater.
They are very tightly connected, no doubt. But Sondheim, of course, didn't do that. He ended up creating Sunday in the Park with George and many more musicals after that. But in that context of reading these 3 books, it sounded like this fantasy of designing video games came out of nowhere. But I wanted to find out where was it coming from. And so when I started researching online and looking at other interviews where Sondheim talked about games and talked about puzzles, I discovered a treasure trove of arrows pointing to something. But I didn't know what that something was. When he was a teenager, when he was in his 20s, all the way up, as David mentioned, through his 80s, he loved puzzles and he loved games. Not just experiencing them, but creating them for others. And I said, wow, I want to get to the bottom of this. This brings together the 2 things I love. How he designed experiences for people through his music and how he designed experiences for people through playful acts, through games and puzzles. Because I wanted to understand how they connected with each other and how they could help us understand who was this man, Stephen Sondheim, and how did his mind work.
So I want to take some time with a few different categories of puzzles because your book covers so much ground. And your podcast also digs really deep. So we're not going to be going as deep as any of these things, but there's a few things I want to poke at real hard. And the first one is cryptic crossword puzzles. Not only did Sondheim have a deep love for cryptics, but he was strangely instrumental in bringing them to the United States. What's the story here?
So first we have to define our terms. I think we all know what a crossword is, but not all of your listeners might know what a cryptic crossword is. Or if they've heard of it, they still might not know what it is, like I was when I started this project. Crosswords started in America, and then were adapted in England, and then transformed in England, I think in the 1930s, maybe the 1920s, into a version that's called cryptic. And that then became the standard version in England. And there were a few people in America who would use that style, but the syntax was very hard to break into. And you had to understand it if you were going to work with it. So that meant Americans didn't really know what this form was. That at the same time was common in England. So Sondheim in America would actually subscribe to British publications that would be sent overseas back in the 50s and 60s so he can do them each week. So what is a cryptic crossword? Historically, American crossword clues are fairly straightforward. Right? What's the name of the team that won the World Series last year? It wouldn't be that simple, but that's the idea. There's a piece of information. You just need to figure out what it is. It's pretty straightforward, and you fill in the spots on the crossword grid. In a cryptic, the clue itself is a puzzle. So if an American crossword has 100 clues, a cryptic crossword in England that's the same size would have 100 different puzzles you have to solve first to even get to the words. So let's talk about how those clues worked. The typical cryptic crossword begins by giving you a sentence that kind of somewhat makes sense. And I'll give you an example of one that is often used in reference to Sondheim. Broken harmonicas found floating in Manhattan. That kind of makes sense. I can picture in my mind some harmonicas and maybe they broke in half and the Hudson River goes around Manhattan. Maybe they're floating in the river. However, the phrase is designed to distract you. Everything that I just pictured in my mind is now an obstacle to solving it, which you'll see in a moment. The first thing you have to do is break a line somewhere in those words. And you have to figure out how the syntax works to clue you where it is. So if I did cryptic crosswords, I would see the word broken and say, oh, we're going to deal with an anagram. What's broken? Harmonicas. It's going to be an anagram of harmonicas. And then what's left after that? Found floating in Manhattan. One side of that line is going to be a straightforward clue, and one's going to be a puzzle. Okay. We already figured out that broken harmonicas is an anagram of harmonicas. So what is found floating in Manhattan? Let's assume now that he's distracting us intentionally, misdirection. It's not the city of Manhattan at all. Where else might we come across the word Manhattan?
In a cocktail.
Exactly. And what do you find floating in a Manhattan?
A cherry.
What kind of cherry?
A maraschino.
Exactly. And you know what an anagram of harmonicas is?
Is it maraschino cherry?
You got it. And that's the answer.
That is excellent.
So every single one of those clues in a cryptic crossword puzzle is broken down like that. And there's multiple versions. So what did Stephen Sondheim do? Well, first, he explained how it worked. He was the puzzle editor for a new publication in New York City in 1968 that's still around today called New York Magazine. For a year and a number of months, he was their puzzle editor. The publisher of the magazine was friends with Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem was friends with Stephen Sondheim. Everyone got brought together. And in between a number of his shows, he took on the role of designing a new cryptic crossword puzzle every week. That's pretty insane. And he not only explained how to do it in the beginning, he removed the obstacles for Americans. In England, it's not only that you have to figure out the puzzle the way I just did, it might be referring to a specific definition in a specific dictionary that everyone knew to use. No one in America would know to use that dictionary, and in fact, they probably wouldn't care. What Sondheim did was remove the publications that one needed to have in one's library in order to solve some of the clues from being required on the American side. And finally, he removed esoteric Briticisms that might have made sense if you were in England, something about cricket, let's say, or a British battle from 500 years ago that would be more accessible to someone who grew up in the British Empire. As a result, what he introduced in America was a more accessible form of cryptic crossword, one with instructions to help people break into it. And then, more importantly, he didn't build them from scratch. Cryptic crosswords often have a meta puzzle. So I'm describing right now how a cryptic crossword is broken down puzzle by puzzle, clue by clue. But once all the clues are arranged, there's always something else. So one of them might be you put everything in the spots, and then there's lines, and you cut them out like a jigsaw, and you rearrange it, and there's a word.
Stop.
Right? Or it's you take a die, a 3-sided die, and you flatten the whole thing, which means you have 6 sides where one side is always connected to one other side, and those connections form words. There's all these complicated meta puzzles that Sondheim loved from the ones he did in England. He saved every one he did. He had his own archive of them, and then he would reference them in his cryptic crosswords and say, this one's thanks to Babs, or this is thanks to AZ. So he was honoring the people behind him and then translating them for an American audience. So when people tell me Stephen Sondheim did puzzles, I didn't know that. I would say yes, and in fact, if he had never written a single musical, I believe he still would have had an obituary in the New York Times, simply for the impact he had on American puzzle design.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And for those of you who enjoy cryptic crosswords, you can, in no small part, thank Stephen Sondheim for bringing them to the United States. And for those of you who hate them, you can also blame him for them.
Godspeed if you love doing them. They are remarkable. Watching someone solve them is remarkable.
Agreed.
And listening to your explanation was also remarkable because it is a difficult thing to explain, but I think you did a really good job clarifying.
Thank you.
Now, Sondheim's love of puzzles, it wasn't just deep, but it was also really wide. And by that, I mean that he embraced a lot of different puzzle types. So talk to me a little bit about his relationship with one of my favorite types of puzzles, the jigsaw puzzle.
Jigsaw puzzles. Oh, I didn't know we'd get to talk about those. How wonderful.
I'm on the episode about jigsaw puzzles. They're big favorites of ours over here on REPOD.
People who are familiar with Sondheim know that you experience Sondheim's work not only through his musicals, but through many reviews that have been produced over the years, starting in the 70s. In fact, the most recent one was this year, in 2025, Old Friends. They take his songs, put them together in different combinations, and maybe there's a story, maybe there's a theme. And those shows, of course, get posters. And then if there's an album cover, and one of the most famous is from the early 70s, and it's called the Scrabble cover. It's not really called that, but like fans call it that, where it used Scrabble letters to put together the things in the show. And that started creating themes where different shows would have a game or puzzle-based design for the cover. So there was one in the early 90s that uses jigsaw puzzle pieces to frame his face and frame his shows. If you're in the theater world, you know that opening night gifts is a big deal. You buy a present for everyone in the show. They buy one for you. Everyone gets them on opening night. They open them up. You see who's smarter than who had something sweet to do, right? So Sondheim, of course, always gave them. And in the late 90s, he was given for himself a jigsaw puzzle from a company in Vermont called Stave Puzzles.
For those who are unfamiliar, most people, when they think of jigsaw puzzles, they're thinking of the cardboard jigsaw puzzles. However, there is a deeper world to jigsaw puzzles, a more beautiful world and a more expensive world. And that is the world of the laser-cut wooden jigsaw puzzle. My personal go-tos for these are Liberty puzzles because they are beautiful, but they are also affordable. But if you want to go even nicer, then there are the stave puzzles, which are very expensive, very beautiful, very intricately built and crafted. And that is the top of the mountain of jigsaw puzzles.
And devious.
Yes.
They are designed, like many of Stephen Sondheim's puzzles were, to take your assumptions and then use them against you. So, for example, the first thing my wife and I will do when we put a jigsaw puzzle together is find all of the edge pieces. Why? We assume edge pieces go on the outside. We look for the four corners. We assume there's four corners. So what's Dave going to do? It's going to make the puzzle not be shaped with four corners, or it's going to put lines inside. And in fact, there might even be spaces cut out where there's windows, where there's no puzzle inside. And you won't know that until you start putting the pieces together and it doesn't do what you expect, because stave puzzles sometimes do not come with pictures.
As a general rule, if you are doing a wooden jigsaw puzzle, don't start with the edges. Always start with imagery that you can start to identify, colors, textures, patterns, and build outward to the edge. At the top of this episode, I talked about how finding all of the overlaps between Stephen Sondheim and puzzles was something that I had wanted to dig into for so long, but I just didn't have the time to do it. When I found out that Barry Joseph was the person working on it, I was not shocked at all, because he has been an active and engaged member of our community, both on Room Escape Artist in the comments and in our Patreon for so many years. And our community is filled with wonderful, wonderful people.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me when interviewing Barry and Will Shortz was, both of them really talked about the power of puzzles to bring a community together. I've been so happy since I found this community. I found like-minded people that I can sit and chat with. It has been such a pleasure making the bonus episodes for this community. Like, there's amazing content in our bonus episodes. We continue the conversation with our guests in a lot of these, and we actually pick a lot of ideas for the bonus episodes from the Discord discussions, the ones that all of you guys are having in the Discord.
They don't even always know that we're using it to get that information, but we do. We are always looking and always learning from our community. And then every once in a while, one of them goes and writes a whole book. It's such a great group of people, and you can join that for as low as $2 a month to get access to that Discord community. You can just lurk if you want, or you can participate. Either way, you can learn more about it at patreon.com/roomescapeartist. And thank you to all of our current patrons, and I hope that you choose to become one of them.
All right, so stave puzzles are now in Sondheim's life. He clearly enjoyed what he received, because his next opening night gift, which was for one of these reviews, putting it together in the early 90s, was a stave puzzle that he customized for each recipient. Now, the cover, as I mentioned, was already a jigsaw puzzle. So the first jigsaw puzzle he commissioned was of an image of a jigsaw puzzle.
Jigsawception.
That's right. And your gift, PG, would have your initials cut into it, PG, on the inside. And if it was yours, David, it would have your initials, DS. And that meant the pieces you thought were outer flat lines were actually internal ones, building out your initials. So as you were building out this jigsaw puzzle, which was the poster of the show you were in, you were going to discover that your initials were in it, and it was customized just for you. And that first gift from Sondheim of jigsaw puzzles stuck. And every show after that where he gave puzzles, from what I've seen in my documentation, was another puzzle from stave, all the way up through the last production when he was alive, which was for Company, which was going to open in March of 2020, was stopped during COVID, and then opened up just weeks before he passed away. So there are a few dozen, I believe, jigsaw puzzles that are all posters of his shows that he gave those opening nights to members of the cast and crew.
Wow, what treasures.
Truly.
I know somebody who has over 20 of them, who is a collector of Sondheimia, and he was generous enough to lend them to me so I could put them together and experience what it was like to experience a Sondheim stave puzzle. and take photographs and video the process, which you can see on my YouTube channel and my Instagram channel, sped up. I am used to, when I'm getting to the end of a jigsaw puzzle and I'm almost done, having the whole process speed up. But with the stave puzzle, it slows down for me for some reason. I might have 7 pieces left and I'm like, where do these go? And I'm stunned that I can't figure out where to go because they're right in front of me.
That's wooden jigsaw puzzles for you.
Love it. Love it.
They are relentless and I love them.
We'll put some photos of that in the show notes.
So for me, the question isn't just, oh, how cool this is or how interesting. It's for me to understand, why did Sondheim choose to do this? There's so many things he could have chosen to give to people. And I interview in the book people who were performers who received those. And they say to me, of course that's what he gave us. Of course that's the part of his life he wants to share with us. Creating that moment where I can have this brilliant coming together from chaos into order, a phrase he often referred to, where you have all the jigsaw pieces spilled on the table, there's no sense to them at all, and bit by bit, they come into order. And at the end, when that last pieces fit into the only place it could possibly go, that moment of order gives you this brilliant moment of clarity. And designing those moments of clarity is part of what I think inspired him, not just in jigsaw puzzles, but in all of his puzzle design.
And on your show, I talk about this in more depth, but for me, I love giving custom wooden jigsaw puzzles as gifts. It's one of my favorite gifts to give. And I also am, as I described, a stress jigsaw puzzler. And for me, there is something really beautiful about solving jigsaw puzzles while I'm under a lot of stress or mourning a loss or something like that. It's something that I always return to when I'm really down. And it is because it's finite and you can just progressively make order from chaos. And it makes me feel good. It's a crutch for me when I really need it. And so hearing his perspective on it, that really resonated with me in a very strong way. And I don't know when the jigsaw puzzle episode of Matching Minds with Sondheim, the podcast, will come out, but that episode was really an incredible pleasure for me to record with you.
And I love getting to hear your thoughts about it as well.
A quote that you brought to my attention, which is from Sondheim's 4 principles that underpinned all of his work, which is content dictates form, less is more, God is in the details, all in the service of clarity. This resonated very strongly for me. It's sort of a incredibly concise consolidation of all of my thoughts on what we're trying to do with all of the different things that we make. Can you give me any more context around Sondheim's perspective on this idea? Because for me, this just sounds like good game design. It's really good communication. It's good writing. It's good making things for an audience.
So there's a few ways we can go here. The first one for me is, okay, Sondheim has come up with instructions for lyricists, the first 3, and the one that wraps on top of them all. Did he do the same thing for games and puzzles? And on one hand, he didn't. But on the other hand, you can bring together things he said to construct them and analyze his games and puzzle designs to pull them out. And that's part of what I tried to do in my book. The bulk of my book is looking at Stephen Sondheim's life from his interest in play, getting people to play, playing with other people. But the last part of the book is teaching people what I think of as his design lessons, both for games and for puzzles. So for me, I look at those 4 and say, okay, content dictates form, less is more, God is in the details, all in the service of clarity. And I ask myself, what would he have said he wants to teach others about how to design puzzles? And when I look at puzzles, I come up with 12. What you just described, David, is how Sondheim wants us to understand how he approached his lyrics as he developed writing them professionally over decades. He didn't have the same level of rigor in the way he approached games and puzzles. In those, he was more interested in exploring different formats that inspired him. And we can see some connections and some echoes, some rhymes, as it were, with how he designed his lyrics and music for his shows. But I think you'll also see many other approaches as well, and much more variety of approaches in how we thought about puzzles and games.
That's a really interesting take on this because, as our listeners know, I don't do the rigorous amount of research on a subject that David does. But, I did some minor digging on this, and I actually found this quote also, and it immediately jumped out to me as something that I thought was very applicable to game design. But I thought that would be an interesting topic in the bonus show, so we'll save it for there. What do you get when you mix pals, puzzles, and trivia? That's right, it's PG's Playhouse, our newest podcast where you can play along with our guests through some games featuring a blend of wordplay and trivia.
Then I share an interesting bit of trivia, lore, or history based on the episode's theme.
What a terrific game. In episode 4, I took a word and I put a hole in one, adding an O into a word to make another word. So if I said a spectrum of color between red and yellow, what would you say? Stick around to the end for the answer.
If you haven't guessed by now, the topic in this episode was mini golf. Not only did we talk about the history of mini golf, but our guests on the episode told us all about the puzzle-filled D&D themed mini golf attraction that they're building in Illinois.
To listen to this episode and all of the rest, check out PG's Playhouse, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can just search for PG's Playhouse or click the link in our show notes. Did you get the answer to a spectrum of color between red and yellow? You take the word range, add an O at the beginning to get orange. Orange, you glad you stayed until the end of this ad.
I first heard of Sondheim's love of puzzles from all of those early escape room creators when they were describing these legendary treasure hunts that he used to produce for his friends. All that I heard about was that he was making them for his friends, they were non-commercial, and they often involved limousines. Tell me the story here. What's the story with these treasure hunts?
Let me set the record straight, David. That's part of what I hope this book will do. There's so many pieces of things said by Sondheim, said about Sondheim, that get repeated like a game of telephone, even by him, and changed over decades of retelling. And to be able to go back to the original source and find out what's true is part of what I loved about writing my book and what I hope my book can do for others by establishing what was.
Legends are tricky.
And then we can debate about the meaning of it. So in 1968, Halloween, Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins designed a treasure hunt for their friends, held at Stephen Sondheim's townhouse in the Turtle Bay section of New York City, which included limousines that took his guests to different locations and ended there. That is the only time, I believe, he ever did a treasure hunt that included limousines, not the only time he designed treasure hunts. In the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the noughts, I have records and often materials from many of his treasure hunts. They were usually designed for friends, sometimes colleagues. They were often site-specific because there was an occasion, but many of the puzzles can work outside those contexts as well. And they were usually done out of love, out of a sense of generosity towards the people he cared about and wanting to create a remarkable experience for them. As a puzzle, to give them an experience of a brilliant moment of clarity, and as a game, to create connections amongst them and with him. That treasure hunt from 1968 is usually the only one that gets talked about. Why? I don't know. There was no press that were there. Almost everyone who was there has passed away. I only know one person still alive from that time who experienced it. But many people who were there did write about it in their own autobiographies. And over the years, Sondheim would reference it. But in referencing it, it was also a misdirection because he wasn't talking about all the others. Not the one in 2013 at City Center. Not the one in 2011 at the American Museum of Natural History. Not the one at someone's Dakota apartment in the noughts. Not the one in the mid-90s, all about lines of poetry from Edna St. Vincent Millay. We were talking in the past about this one from the 1960s. He spent his life designing these treasure hunts. And many people have come to me saying it is that experience of learning about Sondheim's treasure hunt that created, over the decades, a series of connections that inspired people to think about the very form of escape rooms. Now, I don't know if that's true. I find it a little bit tenuous.
I think that finding out about it may have influenced the way people designed some escape rooms. But I don't think that, given the provenance of who were the original creators of escape rooms and where those ideas were branching from, I do not have any reason to believe that the earliest creators were inspired by Sondheim.
So let me put out the argument, David, because I would agree. I don't think it's a direct line, like they heard about Sondheim and they made it. It's that there is a series of causalities. Sondheim creates these treasure hunts in the late 60s, early 70s. That leads him to creating a movie with Anthony Perkins called The Last of Sheila, his only Hollywood movie, a murder mystery. In that movie, he recreates the idea of these site-based treasure hunts. The treasure hunt Sondheim didn't come out of nowhere. He was inspired by one he heard about in Chicago. So Sondheim gets inspired, does his own, adapts it into the form of a movie. Then that movie inspires other people to make their own puzzle hunt experiences. That then inspires Disney to make Midnight Madness, which inspires other people to make point-and-click style games. And then that led to a CD-ROM game, which then people say led to the movie, was it called The Game?
Yeah. I think that the influence over puzzle hunts, I think that that is a more clear line. That line I think we can establish. But I would say that the earliest escape rooms were not that influenced by puzzle hunts. They were sort of an independent creation. But then we ended up with a handful of creators who came from the puzzle hunt world and were very influenced by that. So I do think that there are lines that can be drawn into escape rooms, but not into the direct creation of escape rooms.
That's fair. Thank you.
But it doesn't make any of this any less remarkable that he was making all of these incredible things and inspiring so many people along the way. I've often said that there was no reason that escape rooms couldn't have existed in the 60s or even earlier, but they, in their own way, sort of did. And I imagine for a generation that grew up on pirate stories and pulp magazines, a treasure hunt is the thing you would aspire to.
And when you look back at the details of his treasure hunts, we'll see echoes of things that seem familiar because we know about them from escape rooms. Having an actor who is there to help you along or maybe be in your way, having puzzles that you have to physically put together as a group that unlock the next step of your journey, them all being connected in somewhat of a loose narrative, but really the idea is to get through them, perhaps faster than someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all this talk about escape rooms, and escape rooms only emerged as a medium when Sondheim was in his 80s. So what can you tell us about his escape room playing career?
Sondheim spoke in depth about his relationship with games and puzzles for the media on two different occasions. One was in Games Magazine in 1983, and the second one was the year he passed away for Games World of Puzzles, which is the inheritor from Games Magazine, in early 2021. And in that interview, he's asked about his experience with escape rooms. And in that interview, he said the first escape rooms he went to were in New York City, where he lived, and that he was one of the first people to do it, at least among the people he knew. He said, whoever's notion it was a smart person. It's just really swell. I love that you used the word swell.
Me too.
Right? He says, the fun of the escape room, frankly, is being with a group of people who say, how about trying that one over there? No, push on the wall, push on the wall. So when escape rooms first arrived in New York City, many of them, as you mentioned, David, saw Stephen Sondheim because he was experiencing them with his friends and he enjoyed them. Again, he's in his mid-80s at this point. And if you know the dates and the years of when Sondheim went to a particular escape room, we all know what's the last thing that happens in most escape rooms. A photo is taken and it's stuck on Facebook. And what happens with those photos? They just sit there for year after year. So if you know those dates, you can go to Facebook to an escape room company that he went to, and you can see him surrounded by his friends and loved ones and surrounded by other photos of all the other people who did it that day.
David, please tell me that you did this.
I did not do this. My stalker tendencies are hyper-focused on a person that I am interviewing when I am about to interview them. That is the extent of my stalker tendencies. So I originally found out about Sondheim from my old friend in the escape room world, Derek Tam, who's one of the owners of Mission Escape Games in New York. He was the first person to mention Sondheim to me. I heard about him from Victor over at Escape the Room. I had the most extensive conversation that I had about Sondheim in escape rooms with the folks from Paradiso over dinner after we had played their games. It's bittersweet to me, and we talked about this on your show, and we'll leave links in the show notes to that whole conversation because we dive really deep into this. It's very bittersweet to me learning about this because simultaneously, I know that he was exploring this medium with the exact same games at the exact same time that Lisa and I were. He was having the same reactions to things, playing the same nonsense puzzles that we were playing, seeing all of the different trends that were emerging and changing very quickly. And I feel a real kinship to him for that, and for so many other things that have emerged from this. At the same time, I'm also very sad that he didn't get to see where escape rooms have landed, that he didn't get to set foot in a game like The Man from Beyond by Strange Bird Immersive or Magnifico from Escaparium and see what would happen when you were mixing good actors with escape rooms and the power that would have had. I would have loved to hear what his reaction to that kind of experience would have been.
Me too.
So I want to play for you. This is a clip of you from the episode we did together on escape rooms on your show. It's you reading from your own book.
I spoke with a number of people who did Paradiso with Sondheim, along with other escape rooms. Unfortunately, I can't share that audio, but let me read you 2 paragraphs from my book, a little about what it was like to be in an escape room with the maestro. With first Jonathan Mark Sherman, a playwright and Sondheim playmate, and his frequent collaborator, John Weidman, with whom he worked on Pacific Overtures, Assassins, and Roadshow. Jonathan Mark Sherman recalled one time, after an escape room visit, Sondheim wrote the room's management a letter. This Victorian-themed escape room provided a misleading instruction, causing no lack of frustration after an unnecessary loss of time. Sondheim, ever the mentor, provided them with a critique. Did you hear back? Sherm asked him at the time. Sondheim had not, which made Sherm laugh at the memory. You're someone that escaped the room, and then an email comes in from Sondheim, and they ask, who wants to respond to this? Followed by a chorus of, not it, not it. After the room, a meal would follow, which Sherm always treasured. Mary Pat Walsh, he explained, Steve's amazing chef for many, many years and also a dear friend, would always choose some fantastic restaurant for us to go to, post-escape room, to break down the experience and compare notes. Yet, not all in Sondheim's coterie shared his delight with the challenges found in the pre-meal escape room. I'm an impatient person, John Weidman said in an interview, and so those kinds of games always drove me a little crazy. Weidman would be delighted to be there with Sondheim and his friends. But once I got in the room and once the game started, basically, I just wanted to get out. It was not as if he was feeling claustrophobic. He was just less interested in escaping the room than escaping to dinner and the socializing that would follow. Sondheim felt the opposite. He never wanted it to end.
That was my favorite passage from the book that you had read there. And it's really because that sounded just like the experiences that me and my friends were having when we were going out and playing at Escape the Room. That game was The Home, and that was Lisa's first escape room. And it had some janky stuff. All of Escape the Room's games had some really janky stuff, with maybe one exception. And even the going out for dinner part, I just have to imagine that they were having much better meals than Lisa and I were after these games.
I feel like so many of the escape room creators that we have come on, when we ask them, why did you make escape rooms? And they say, well, it's because we played one and it was fun, but we thought we could make it better. And I think if Sondheim had maybe discovered escape rooms when he was a little bit younger, he may very well have thought the exact same thing.
When I think about Sondheim and escape rooms, I'm contextualizing it in his half century spent designing puzzles and games to play with his friends. He would call them games nights. 1960s, 1970s, he'd bring his friends over and he would design parlor games. He would design these unique treasure hunts for them. And now escape rooms are here. He doesn't have to plan any of it except for scheduling them to go. That must have felt incredible. He got to have those same moments of clarity and feel that sense of connection that he was experiencing through his games and puzzles, but now someone else can plan them for him. And then they could have dinner after.
Hello, escape room fans. Alex from Cogs here. I could tell you about how our show control system can make your escape rooms more immersive, is super easy to use, has plug-and-play hardware, and has great support, but I'm not. I just wanted to let you know that you can now enjoy a bunch of new content we're putting out on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. We'll be posting about all the fun things you can do with Cogs, as well as what we're up to, the attractions we visit, and even a new podcast called Inventures, where we interview some of the creative geniuses behind all sorts of immersive experiences and ask them what they've always wanted to make. Cool! Find us at cogs.show in your browser, on Instagram or TikTok. To listen to Inventures plus more relevant content, subscribe to the Cogs Lab on YouTube. If you fancy giving us a go, you can also get an exclusive 50% off our starter set plus free shipping by using the code REPOD, that's REPOD, at checkout. Cheers!
Speaking of a Sondheim game that feels like the inverse of escape rooms in so many ways, tell us about Hostilities.
Ooh, thank you for asking me about Hostilities. What makes you ask about it?
The reason we're asking is because it's in so many ways the inverse of escape rooms. It is an anti-collaborative game. It is in some ways a very cruel game, and I'm really interested in the dynamic of it.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
PG, you're going to love this.
When Stephen Sondheim was a teenager, he met Mary Rogers. Mary Rogers would write about the two of them throughout their lives were involved in the worlds of musical theater and each other. And in the 1960s, they would play parlor games together. And one of those parlor games that she would play with Stephen Sondheim, and perhaps even introduced it, is called Hostilities. And she details it in her autobiography that came out after she passed away just a few years ago in great detail, which I reproduce within my book. Hostilities is interesting because of just what you said. The game is hostile. It is mean. It is a game designed for people who know each other well to embarrass the heck out of each other. And be proud of having done the best job of setting other people up.
Just roasting each other.
That's right. The way the game worked in general is that people would write down impertinent questions, I think that's his word, on pieces of paper, assign it to them, and everyone would collect all their questions. They didn't know who wrote them. And then they had to answer them all on the same slip of paper, and then removing their name from it, put it back in the middle. So now, in the middle of this group of people is a collection of sheets where an anonymous person wrote a question for an anonymous person who answered it. And then people just take the questions and answers out and read them and try and figure out who was it for and who wrote it. People described leaving these games in tears.
The anonymizing it and then forcing people to guess? Oh my God, that's
Exactly.
diabolical.
And it's right in the name, Hostilities, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like to me like the dark side of, a theater game.
It's like a gamified version of a slam book.
This definitely has theater kid energy.
Oh, yeah. But what's interesting to me about it is, okay, when Sondheim was younger, he was willing to play these emotionally raw games like Hostilities. But when I interview people who played games with him later in his life, that's not the tone of those games. They would use words not like hostility to describe them, but words like generosity. I think the games he played when he was younger, the games he designed, were opportunities for him to maybe explore and exercise some of his demons. And when we look at how he wanted to connect with people later in his life, those games were marked with such a remarkable playfulness. I think they show us that he was able to get to a different place in his life. And the arc of his gameplay traces that for us.
That
Can totally relate. Like from my Survivor days, I used to be into competitive games, hidden deduction games where all you're doing is traumatizing each other and falsely accusing and gaslighting your friends. And nowadays, the only games I want to play are all collaborative ones. Community is a really strong word for me. So I totally relate to that.
And I think this gives us an opportunity to ask your listeners to look at their own lives and think about their own narrative arc playing games. What games did they like when they were kids? What did they play when they were in their 20s? And what are they playing now? And what games would they like to be playing in the future? How do they want to be connecting with people?
Love that. All right, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your education consulting practice, as it's how I originally met you. Tell me about that practice and what you're striving for in the education space.
Wow, I didn't see that one coming. I got into the social impact side of new media in 1997. And then a few years after that, formally into education, but informal education, working in after-school programs with young people. And it was in that context that I rediscovered games. I was a gamer growing up, Atari and television, programming games myself on my Franklin Ace 1000 in the early 80s. But I saw what felt like to me an addictive pull in console games. And so I missed the Nintendo revolution. I played Myst in the 1990s. I got a little bit into that space, but it wasn't until I saw 3 children playing Super Smash Brothers that I really had a moment of insight. I was watching a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 12-year-old all playing the same game, all playing it in different ways that were age appropriate, all easily visually following the language of how to understand what was important on the screen. And I couldn't understand for a moment what they were doing. I saw them, but on the screen, I could not follow the fight for a moment. Who was up, who was down, where attacks were coming from, could not for a second. And I knew if I wanted to understand young people today, and I was working in youth development, working with young people, I had to start understanding games and the role that games played in their lives. That was when I started working at the organization where I worked at, Global Kids, on games with young people. So they could not only be consuming games, but also creating them. Creating one of the first after-school programs where young people designed video games with social content. It's in that context that I was always exploring what was the latest and interesting emerging media to work with young people to let them be ones who were creating them. So when you and I met, David, I was working at the American Museum of Natural History in the education department, helping them develop a digital strategy to help young people today not only learn about science, but learn about the role that digital tools played in helping scientists, research, helping the designers of the space show at the planetarium design space shows, and all the different new affordances that the latest and greatest digital tools were allowing in education and connecting with their personal lives. That was when escape rooms came around. And there was a new box at the time. You might remember who it was. It was the escape room box for classrooms.
Oh, that was Breakout EDU?
Breakout EDU, that's right. And so that was what I would do back then. I would say, oh, this is interesting, Breakout EDU. How do we bring that into the classroom? And in fact, I first met Breakout EDU at a Mind Fair event led by Steve Isaacs in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. And I said, this is amazing. We got to figure out what we can do with science with this. And at the same time, we were exploring with the HoloLens, which was Microsoft's mixed reality tool at the time. And we were trying to figure out how we can bring real scientific content into mixed media experiences. So what you experienced with us, which we called Escape the Planet, was taking real data about the location of stars, putting them into the HoloLens, and then putting that experience into an escape room so we can study just one thing. Could we make a mixed reality experience be social? And is games the way to lead us to that? Are games the right pathway for us to achieve that?
It's fun. Also, strange coincidence, one of the odder episodes of Reality Escape Pod was season 2, episode 4, where we actually have an episode about Super Smash Brothers, which is an outlier in our canon.
It all connects back in the end. We're all connected here.
Absolutely. Mentioned at the top, Games for Change. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with that organization and what it is?
Now is the perfect time to ask because I just explained the context. So there I am, 2002, 2003, working with young people of color in after-school programs in New York City, designing video games, web-based games, and I needed people to see them. I needed opportunities for funders to learn about what we were doing. I needed to connect with potential partners who had content, who might want to work with us, and I needed opportunities for my young people to see what real game designers look like and get to be with them and be leaders presenting what they did and seeing those as potential pathways for themselves. So I was very fortunate at the time. The Woodrow Wilson Center in DC had just started something called Serious Play, which was looking at the serious side of games, which meant a number of things: games for health, games for simulation for military trainings. And me and a few other people were invited to go to that. And we left that saying, we need to figure out the space for nonprofits, for social change, for activists who are seeing something new and powerful in games. And so we created the Games for Change Festival with their support in New York City. And over the years, we created communities both in New York City and around the world of people who care about not just games being fun, which is important, but that they also recognize the social impact they have on the people who play them and the communities where they play them.
Okay. You've just done a little bit of a review, if you will, of Sondheim's relationship with games. But your book, Matching Minds with Sondheim, is available now in hardcover, and it is perfect place for people to go and dig in if you found anything that we were talking about interesting. Barry, where can people find your book?
Of course, where all good books are sold, which might be an independent bookstore in your neighborhood or wherever you like to buy books online.
Fantastic. And how about your podcast, Matching Minds with Sondheim, the podcast?
That's it. That's the name. Type that into any of your podcasters. My book was created through research at 7 different research institutions and over 100 conversations with people who knew Sondheim or worked with Sondheim. I have permission to use over half of the 60 hours of recordings that those interviews produced. Those 30 hours I'm working into my podcast series, but then bringing in people like you, David, who I couldn't bring into the book itself, to then comment on both the topics we're exploring and hear and respond to those very interviews.
I had a lot of fun recording with you both times I was on. So please do check that out.
And I recommend you start with the one that own David was on. Made it on quite a few episodes.
Stephen Sondheim and Escape Room, Stephen Sondheim and Jigsaw Puzzles. And maybe more.
Maybe more.
And if people do get the book, they might wonder, if this is a book about puzzles, are there any hidden puzzles in the book?
An interesting question.
Can podcasters see me lifting my eyebrow?
Something to ponder.
It's very interesting. Barry, you have just completed a very extensive journey of publishing a book. I am curious what comes next for you.
A nice long weekend rest. No, I'm always making 1,000 things at once. So when you ask that question, I have to decide which one do I talk about now. I never know which one's going to make it past the finish line, but I have a board game I'm designing. I have an interactive fiction that I'm designing. I have ideas for a new book, which is based on the Chautauqua Institution, which is in Western New York, where I spent many summers as a young adult during a very formative time in American history and had many formative experiences for myself. But at the end of the day, I listen to the things that inspire me. I watch for opportunities to tell stories that haven't been told. I look for connections I can make with other people who have access to materials or stories or experiences, but not necessarily the venue for putting them out there. And I try and figure out where my role is in my relationship to those stories and those people to help create a vehicle, as I did with Matching Minds with Sondheim, to put them out into the world in an ethical, responsible, and meaningful way. So I, like you, look forward to finding out what that next thing is going to be, whether it's a book, a game, or some combination of the two, or some new medium that doesn't even exist yet.
Whatever you're doing, I have no doubt that it will be interesting and fun.
If you want to follow along on Barry's journey and see what he's up to next, what's the best way for people to follow your work or connect with you?
Currently, my most active presence is on Instagram at Matching Minds with Sondheim. I'm also on Facebook under the same phrase. But my website, matchingmindswithsondheim.com, is the best place to go and sign up for an email, see when I might be speaking by you, the latest on my podcast, my latest media hits, and general stuff about the book.
We'll have links to all of that in the show notes.
Barry, thank you so much for joining us. Too often, I think about a topic that someone should write a book about, and then I get excited and I find the book and I hate it. And I had the inverse experience with Matching Minds with Sondheim.
Oh.
I found your book, and it was not just everything that I wanted to learn about Sondheim and puzzles and games. It was so much more, and it was so beautifully written and so incredibly well researched. It's rare that see somebody write the first work on something and just make it the definitive work. And in my opinion, that is what you have achieved here. Cannot wait to give this as a gift to people. I cannot wait to put this into our holiday gift guide later this fall. I am so eager through this podcast and other places to tell everybody about Matching Minds with Sondheim because I think it is wonderful. And the subject is so interesting and so well captured. So thank you for that.
That is high praise, and especially from you. Thank you so much, David. And you too, PG.
This episode of Reality Escape Pod is produced by Teresa Piazza with support by Lisa Spira. We're edited by Steve Ewing of Stand Inside Media, music by Ryan Elder, logo by Janine Proct, and all of this is brought to you by RoomEscapeArtist.com, your home for well-researched, rational, and reasonably humorous escape room and immersive gaming content and events. Thank you to all of our highest tier Patreon supporters: Chris Laughlin, Panic Room, Olivier Escape, Escaparium, Breakout Games, Derek Tam, Andy Mincer, Mystery Unfolds, Karen, Byron Delmonico, Keystone Escape Games, and Rex Miller. Thank you to all of you for your ongoing support.
If you've made it all the way to the end of the episode, you're still here, looks like you had a pretty good time listening, we would love it if you took that good time and left us a review. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It helps with making people find our podcast, and it even helps us with getting guests on the show.
And if writing a review is a bridge too far, just share the link to an episode that you like with someone who you think will appreciate it. Word of mouth, that is the thing that helps us grow. Thank you so much for supporting us, however you're doing it, whether it is on Patreon, with a review, or just sharing a link. We appreciate you.
I'm going to tell a story about an escape room called Paradiso, Chapter 1. An escape room which happens to have included a puzzle designed by Stephen Sondheim in 1968. But if you want to know more about that, read my book. What I'm going to talk about is my experience. At the end of Paradiso, there is a body on the ground. And it's designed where the guy must be standing a floor below and his head sticks up, and it sticks up into a prop of this body. I'm not going to talk about what you do with the body. All that's important is that he dies. He's giving us some advice. He said, turn the bomb off. He said it, and he died. And we're stuck in the room, we're touching everything, we're flipping all the switches, and someone goes and opens up the door. At that moment, the door opens. It wasn't supposed to. Standing on the other side of that door is a hallway with all of the people who were waiting for us to come out. And they're shocked, because they knew we didn't do what we were supposed to do for that door to open. And that meant also the dead body also knew. I'm on the ground next to that dead body. Suddenly his head lifts up. He still has a little more life in him. And he croaks out, "Don't go through the door." And he dies again. And I tell everyone, close the door, close the door. We solved the puzzle. We opened the door. Then they received us at the end of the game.